Film summary: Rosemary's Baby, and the apartment that turns marriage into a trap. Why Rosemary's Baby still feels so disturbingly modern. The story begins in a seemingly perfect location, an old New York apartment building, high ceilings, heavy doors, a certain faded grandeur, the kind of address that gives a young couple the impression that they have entered a more ideal version of their life. In Roman Polanski's 1968 film, Rosemary's Baby, adapted from Ira Levin's 1967 novel, that promise is the first deception, the world before everything changes. At first, the world of Rosemary's Baby is recognizable enough to feel safe. Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse are a young married couple trying to build a life in Manhattan. He is an actor still waiting for real success. She is more grounded, more domestic, and more immediately believable as the person trying to make a home out of uncertainty. They move into the Bramford, a grand old building with a terrible reputation, despite a friend's warning about its history of violence and witchcraft. The warning lands, but not with enough force to alter their decision. That is crucial. The film does not begin with obvious foolishness. It begins with an ordinary compromise against vague unease. The apartment itself matters almost as much as any character. BFI notes the importance of the Dakota-inspired setting, and Mubi's Notebook has written about how the film turns the search for urban housing into a source of anxiety. The place is elegant, desirable, and faintly wrong. It offers status and space, but it also seems to come with a hidden social order already in place. Rosemary is not just moving into a new home. She is entering a system she does not yet understand. The early scenes are patient. The film watches Rosemary decorate, settle in, and imagine a future. Guy seems affectionate enough, if slightly self-absorbed. Their married life is not idealized, but it is plausible. That plausibility is the point. The horror works because the opening rhythm feels grounded in daily routines, minor irritations, and the little negotiations of shared life. Then the neighbors arrive. Minnie and Roman Cassavetes are intrusive, talkative, and impossible to ignore. They seem comic at first, almost too colorful to be dangerous. Yet, from the beginning, they cross boundaries that should matter. They enter the couple's space, claim emotional familiarity too quickly, and become especially attached to Guy. The building no longer feels like a refuge. It feels occupied. And once that social pressure sets in, there is no easy way back to privacy. The first break in the pattern, the first real rupture, comes through a mixture of coincidence, intrusion, and opportunity. Rosemary meets Terry Ginofrio, a young woman the Cassavetes have taken in, and sees in her a version of female vulnerability that the film does not yet explain. Terry is fragile, grateful, and strangely absorbed into the older couple's orbit. When she apparently dies by suicide, the event is shocking, but the film does not stop to mourn for long. Instead, the death becomes part of a rapid rearrangement of social roles. Rosemary receives Terry's charm. The Cassavetes move closer to her life. The atmosphere tightens. Soon after, Guy's career changes with suspicious speed. An actor who had been in his way suddenly goes blind, and Guy lands the part that may finally make him successful. The timing is too neat to ignore. What matters is not only the event itself, but also the moral drift it reveals. Guy begins to accept new benefits without asking what they cost. The film does not make him a cackling villain from the start. It lets ambition soften his judgment first. The next step is the pregnancy. Rosemary and Guy have planned for a child, but the circumstances of conception are presented through one of the film's most disturbing passages: a drugged evening, a dreamlike ritual, an assault Rosemary experiences in fragments, and a waking explanation from Guy that he did not want to miss baby night. Even before the supernatural dimension is fully confirmed, the moral fact is already devastating. Rosemary's body has ceased to be fully hers in the eyes of the people around her. From that moment, the film changes shape. It is no longer simply about a creepy building or odd neighbors. It becomes a story about consent, control, and the terrifying possibility that the people closest to Rosemary are managing her life more than she understands. The real break in the pattern is not the occult, it is the collapse of trust. And once that trust is gone, the film never lets her recover it. the people who carry the story. Rosemary is the center of everything, and the film works because Mia Farrow plays her not as a generic victim but as a person whose decency becomes a vulnerability. AFI identifies Farrow as the film's clear lead, but what matters most in performance terms is how she makes Rosemary observant, polite, and increasingly desperate without losing the character's intelligence. Rosemary is not weak. She is systematically overruled. That distinction serves as the moral engine of the story. Guy is one of the film's most unsettling figures because he does not initially look monstrous. He looks familiar. He is vain, ambitious, somewhat smug, and eager to rise. John Cassavetes plays him with enough charm to make his betrayal plausible. He is not driven by grand ideology. He is driven by appetite, resentment, and the seduction of advancement. That makes him worse. He is not serving evil out of deep conviction. He is doing it because the deal works for him. Then there are Minnie and Roman Cassavetes. Ruth Gordon's Minnie, in particular, became legendary, winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for the role. On paper, Minnie could have been played as broad comic relief. Instead, she becomes unbearable in a precise way. Chatty, nosy, full of faux warmth, incapable of respecting boundaries, and always performing care while exerting control. Roman is quieter, colder, and more overtly authoritative. Together, they represent a kind of parasitic intimacy. They do not conquer Rosemary's world by force at first. They colonize it socially. The supporting figures matter because they help define Rosemary's shrinking room to maneuver. Hutch, the family friend, represents warning and outside memory. Dr. Saperstein represents authority captured by the same corrupt network. Dr. Hill appears briefly as a possible escape route, which makes his failure even harsher. Every institution Rosemary turns toward is either compromised or too weak to protect her. The deeper conflict is not only supernatural, it is structural loneliness. How the story unfolds. Once Rosemary becomes pregnant, the film tightens around the daily experience of being monitored. Minnie dictates what she should drink. Guy pressures her to keep seeing the doctor favored by the Cassavetes. Her pain is dismissed as normal. Her fear is treated as nerves. Her body becomes public property, interpreted by others while she is expected to remain grateful. The horror here is procedural. Scene by scene, the film shows how control can look like care. Rosemary begins to notice the pattern before anyone believes her. The pregnancy leaves her in extreme pain and visible decline, yet the authority figures around her insist that everything is proceeding as it should. When she cuts her hair, seeking some small act of self-definition, even that becomes another point of social management. The film is full of moments like these. Tiny choices swallowed up by commentary, correction, or ridicule. The occult conspiracy works because it is embedded inside ordinary domestic condescension. As Rosemary gathers information, the story becomes a paranoid investigation. She links Terry's death, the building's history, the strange charm, Hutch's warnings, and the suspicious behavior of the people around her. Crucially, the film does not rush this process. It allows Rosemary to think, doubt, test, and revise. That pacing is one reason the film remains so effective. The audience is not simply waiting for a jump scare, it is living inside her increasingly coherent suspicion. By the time she tries to seek help outside the circle closing around her, the pressure has become nearly total. Guy is no longer her ally. The doctors are not neutral. The neighbors are not merely annoying. And the pregnancy itself has become the mechanism by which everyone claims a right over her. The story's stakes rise not because the world gets louder, but because Rosemary's options become smaller. That pressure is what drives the film toward its decisive turn. The scene, chapter, or turn that changes everything. The decisive turn comes when Rosemary stops wondering whether she is imagining things and acts on the belief that she is experiencing real events. This is the moment when paranoia becomes knowledge. She reads the clues differently. She understands that Hutch's warning was real. She realizes the necklace, the drinks, the doctor, the neighbors, and Guy's complicity all form one pattern. And once she reaches that conclusion, the film becomes almost unbearably tense because her clarity arrives too late to restore power. One of the film's most famous sequences follows Rosemary into the streets of New York as she tries to escape. Polanski shot part of that scene with Farrow moving through real traffic. And the result matters because it gives the panic a documentary edge. The world outside the apartment does not suddenly become dramatic in a stylized way. It becomes indifferent, crowded, and difficult to navigate. Rosemary is not just fleeing evil, she is trying to make herself legible in a city that keeps moving around her. When she reaches Dr. Hill, the scene offers a brief possibility that rational authority might finally intervene. Instead, that hope collapses. Hill contacts the very people Rosemary fears. It is one of the cruelest structural moves in the film, because it confirms that her isolation is complete. At that point, the story no longer depends on uncertainty about whether the conspiracy exists. The conspiracy matters because every recognized form of authority ultimately serves it. But that moment changes the meaning of everything before it. What is transformed here is not only the plot, but also the film's moral shape. Before this turn, Rosemary still has some room to think of herself as a wife, a patient, a tenant, and a friend. After that, she is reduced to a function. The child inside her has become the reason others value her. Her will, pain, and testimony mean almost nothing beside it. The film's supernatural horror and its social horror lock together completely in this stretch. Evil is no longer hidden in symbols. It is operating through marriage, medicine, and manners. The ending and what it resolves. The ending is famous because it resolves the film's central ambiguity while refusing emotional comfort. Rosemary gives birth after being subdued and sedated. When she wakes, she is told the baby died, but the sound of an infant crying through the wall leads her to discover a hidden entrance into the Cassavetes' apartment, where the entire truth is staged with ritual calm. The coven is gathered around the cradle. Roman tells her the child is the son of Satan. The line about the baby having his father's eyes has become one of the film's defining moments because it replaces explanation with grotesque certainty. Literal questions are answered. Rosemary was not delusional. The conspiracy was real. Guy betrayed her. The pregnancy was engineered. The child lives. In that sense, the film does not end in uncertainty. A 2023 scholarly article summarized in Taylor and Francis even argues that the final sequence leaves no real doubt that the events are actual within the film's world. Emotionally, though, the ending is much harder to settle. Rosemary does not destroy the child. She does not escape. She does not win in any conventional sense. Instead, after fury, revulsion, and shock, she responds to the baby's crying and begins to rock the cradle. That gesture can be read in more than one way, as surrender, as maternal instinct surviving catastrophe, as the final theft of choice, or as the film's bleakest recognition that attachment can exist, even in violation. The movie preserves that complexity, rather than flattening it into a simple moral statement. The final afterimage is not just a satanic triumph. Is Rosemary still being asked to mother, under conditions that have annihilated consent? The plot resolves. The wound does not. What the story is really about. On the surface, Rosemary's Baby is about witches, conspiracy, and the birth of the Antichrist. Beneath that surface, it is about bodily autonomy, intimate betrayal, and the violence hidden inside respectable structures. That reading is not a modern imposition. Contemporary and later criticism alike has returned to the film's treatment of pregnancy, control, and the social isolation of women. EBSCO's overview of the novel emphasizes bodily autonomy, and scholarly writing has linked the film's terror to persecution, contamination, and betrayal from within one's closest relationships. The film is also about how power disguises itself. No one needs to chain Rosemary in a dungeon for most of the running time. They need only overtalk her, redirect her, medicate her, patronize her, and keep telling her that wiser people know better. That is why the movie remains more upsetting than many louder horror films. Its central mechanism is social gaslighting before the term became common language. There is also a sharp satire in the story's treatment of marriage and ambition. Guy effectively trades Rosemary's bodily integrity for professional advancement. That bargain is supernatural in content, but brutally ordinary in moral shape. He sacrifices what should be sacred, because success matters more to him than loyalty. The devil in Rosemary's Baby is real within the story, but the film's deepest disgust is reserved for human willingness to collaborate when reward is offered. The religious material matters too, though the film is careful about how it uses it. This film is not simply a sermon in reverse. It stages Catholic symbols, satanic inversion, and a world in which evil does not appear as chaos, but as organization. The horror comes from seeing ritual, medicine, and domestic life aligned against one woman's testimony. The story's deepest concern is not merely whether evil exists. It is whether ordinary people will recognize it when it arrives dressed as community. Why it endures. Rosemary's Baby endures because it solved a difficult artistic problem with unusual precision. It took Gothic horror and relocated it to modern urban life without losing dread. It kept the supernatural while making the everyday feel more dangerous than any monster effect. Britannica calls it a landmark of the genre. AFI still highlights it among major thrillers, and the Library of Congress selected it for the National Film Registry in 2014 as a work of lasting significance. It also lasts because its fears remain legible. The emotional machinery transcends the 1960s Manhattan setting. People still respond to the apartment as a trap, to the husband as an opportunist, to the doctors as compromised authorities, and to Rosemary's isolation as something painfully recognizable. The film keeps finding new audiences, because its most frightening idea is not a cult novelty. It is the possibility that everyone around you can agree to explain away your reality. Its legacy is also formal. It showed how horror could be elegant, restrained, literate, and commercially potent at once. Adapted from Levin's best-selling 1967 novel, released in 1968, and anchored by Ruth Gordon's Oscar-winning supporting turn, it helped define a mode of psychological horror that many later films still borrow from. What remains after the final frame is not just dread, but violation made intimate. A marriage, an apartment, a pregnancy, a circle of neighbors. Everything that should form a private life becomes the machinery of takeover. That is why the film lingers. It understands that the most durable horror is the kind that enters through the front door smiling.